During the Second World War, uncompromising air battles raged over Europe. At the vanguard stood the legendary Supermarine Spitfire, a sleek machine with elliptical wings that became a symbol of heroism. Yet for a Spitfire pilot, there was nothing romantic waiting ahead, only the hard and merciless reality of a daily fight for survival. Young and often barely 20, novice pilots had to withstand extreme physical and psychological pressure, and their chances of a long life in the wartime sky were very small. In this video, you'll see how difficult and exhausting a Spitfire pilot's life truly was, from harsh, grinding training and endless nerve-wracking hours of waiting on the airfield to moments of terror amid raging aerial battles. First, some context. It is 1940. Britain stands face to face with the threat of a Nazi invasion. In a moment, we will reveal how these Spit pilots, as the Spitfire was familiarly called, played a key role in their country's defense. We will also lift the veil on what it meant to become a pilot of this iconic fighter and what sacrifices it demanded. Prepare for a unique look into the lives of men whom fate destined to be elite fighter pilots, yet who also lived a daily routine of discipline, fear, grit, and camaraderie. No one found themselves in the ranks of RAF pilots by accident. All were volunteers driven by a mix of patriotism, adventurous spirit, and determination to face the enemy. There were many candidates for fighter wings, and the admission criteria were strict. A young man had to pass demanding medical tests, demonstrate excellent eyesight, quick reflexes, and mental resilience. The intake process, beyond paperwork, included a series of tests and interviews. Candidates had to show spatial orientation and quick reactions on training devices for target tracking or in coordination tests. They also underwent a thorough medical. Eyesight had to be nearly eagle-sharp. Hearing and overall fitness were checked. A future pilot could not suffer from claustrophobia or a strong tendency to nausea. In some cases, the RAF also tested a candidate's tolerance to G-forces and disorientation, for example on a rotating chair simulating spins and loss of balance. Only those who passed all of this could proceed to flight training. Not everyone made it through the sieve. The lucky ones who did then embarked on a long, intensive preparation. Training began with several weeks of ground school, where civilians became soldiers. Cadets learned order and discipline, reveille at dawn, formations, drill. Beyond drill, they spent hours in classrooms over books and calculations, studying the theory of flight, aerodynamics, airframe construction, and even the basics of ballistics to understand their weapons. Add to that navigation, plotting course and time, reading maps, and even the stars. Morse code and radio procedure were also mandatory. Many cadets, more used to practice than school, were overwhelmed by the sheer amount of theory. They knew, however, that this knowledge could one day save their lives in combat. After theory, at last came the coveted time in the air. At training airfields, tiger moths and other trainers awaited. Each student began with an instructor who taught takeoffs, turns, cross-country navigation, and above all, landings. The first solo was usually a decisive milestone. Imagine the nerves of a novice. Until now, an experienced hand sat beside him, smiling and ready to take over. But now the engine rumbles, and he's alone. The student gives the instruments a final check, clenches the control column, and lifts the little airplane off the ground. A few tense minutes circling the field, and then a safe landing. Euphoria. He did it. For the first time, he has flown an aircraft by himself. His heart is racing, and he knows he's taken another step toward the coveted pilot's wings. Training, however, was far from over after that first solo. Hundreds of hours followed. Primary trainers gave way to more powerful machines. For example, the North American Harvard, much closer to a true fighter. Cadets practiced aerobatics, hard turns, formation flying, and gunnery against towed sleeves. Instructors were often seasoned veterans who demanded perfection. Those who couldn't keep pace or repeated errors could be washed out. The RAF could not afford to send an unprepared pilot into combat. Mistakes in the air were paid for with lives. Under normal conditions, training could last 12–18 months, with over 200 flight hours. But wartime necessity sometimes forced drastic cuts, especially in the critical year 1940. There were cases where a trainee received his wings in just 6 months, with only about 150 hours. That meant very young pilots, not fully tempered by experience, often entered the fiercest fighting. Despite strict selection and training, accidents happened. Some young men tragically died before ever seeing the enemy. A technical fault or a botched landing could be enough. In hurried, hard-banking mock dogfights, an inexperienced pilot might lose control and crash. These tragedies warned the rest that there was no room for carelessness or overconfidence in the cockpit. After basic and advanced training came a final phase: operational training units. There, the newly winged pilots first met the combat aircraft they would fly, and at last, the legendary Spitfire. The first Spitfire flight was unforgettable. The aircraft was far faster and more responsive than anything they had flown. Many later said the Spitfire reacted to the slightest movement, giving flight a whole new dimension, like it became an extension of the pilot's body. Mastering such a powerful machine, of course, required further training. Newcomers practiced takeoffs and landings. The Spitfire had a reputation for being tricky to land due to its narrow undercarriage, fired live rounds at towed targets, and flew mock combats. For pilots from occupied countries, Czechoslovaks, Poles, and others, training had another dimension. They had to overcome the language barrier, understand commands and messages in English, and learn British terminology and flying slang. Many a foreigner felt a shiver the first time radio calls crackled in his headset, hoping to interpret them correctly. Even so, they adapted quickly and soon excelled. Many Allied nations sent their young men to the RAF. Along with Britons came Canadians, Australians, South Africans, volunteers from the United States, and émigrés from occupied Europe. For all of them, the rule was the same. Training had to forge disciplined, capable pilots who could be relied upon in combat. Finally, after months of work, came the day a young pilot was posted to a frontline squadron. He wore his wings on his chest and often still held a photo from the winging ceremony. At a brief parade, the CO pinned the pilot's badge to his tunic. The young officer felt immense pride. He had fulfilled a dream. At the same time, many realized the carefree period of training was over and the brutal reality of war awaited beyond the gate. As soon as a fresh pilot arrived at a forward base and first saw a Spitfire bearing his new squadron's markings, he must have felt a mix of elation and nerves. What awaited him now? Intensive schooling was over. The real fight for life was beginning. In a moment, we'll move to one such base and look into the daily routine of pilots on constant alert. The newcomer had to slip quickly into the squadron's rhythm. A wartime airbase, whether in England or elsewhere, was its own world. Pilots usually lived in simple barrack rooms or wooden huts near the runway. No luxury, often only a metal bed, a locker, and a shared washroom. Maps were spread out, orders and duty rosters pinned to notice boards. The bases themselves were frequent targets of enemy raids. It was not unusual for pilots to leap from bed at night to sirens, dashing to shelters while explosions rippled nearby. In the morning, they would find fresh craters on the field and shattered buildings, part of their life as well. On a forward base, meals came from the military kitchen and the mess. Even though rationing in Britain was strict and food scarce, command tried to keep the pilots well fed. Breakfast often meant eggs and bacon, a wartime luxury. Lunch might be a simple stew or meat with vegetables, and always strong tea to push back fatigue. Dinner was modest, but calories were ensured. A physically and mentally draining duty lay ahead. The grass glistens with cold dew. The air is damp and raw against the skin. Picture such a morning in southern England in 1940. Dawn. Mist lies over the airfield. Phones ring in the huts and sleepy young men in blue uniforms bolt down breakfast. If there's time, a mug of tea and some toast or bacon and eggs. Today, there's no savoring it. The CO sticks his head in the door and calls out loudly, "Stand by, gentlemen. We may be off in minutes." Half-asleep pilots grab helmets, parachutes, and maps and jump into the back of an open truck. It rattles them along the perimeter track to the dispersals, where their Spitfires sit far apart, camouflaged and ready. Ground crew are already waiting. They've worked through the night or at dawn, rearming guns, checking oil and fuel, testing engines. Some Spitfire fitters are warming engines at idle while two men sit on each tailplane to hold it down. The pull of power would otherwise lift the tail. In the dim light, the pilots change into flying gear beside the aircraft. Over their uniforms go flying overalls and high boots. On their heads, leather helmets with goggles cocked up on the brow, and around their chests, Mae West life jackets in case of a ditching at sea. Each man quickly walks around his aircraft for a pre-flight check, then clambers into the tight cockpit. A mechanic straps him in and hands him the parachute, which doubles as his seat cushion. Everything happens in haste, yet it's routine. Everyone knows his part. And then, the hardest part, waiting. Despite the bustle, there may be half an hour or hours of uncertainty. Pilots, seated in cockpits or on the grass beside their machines, wait for the scramble order. The engines are still silent. Fuel must be saved, and there's time to start only on a real alarm. It's cold and damp. The sun is just nudging the horizon. Someone reads a book. Another hums a favorite tune from the wireless. A third closes his eyes, trying to snatch a little more sleep. Suddenly, the field telephone in the dispersal hut rings. Hearts skip a beat. "Alarm?" a pilot asks the mechanic on the line. "False alarm, HQ calling. Come to readiness. Another section on standby." Hearts settle again. The wait drags on. Nerves hum. Around 7 a runner arrives with a red signal flag. "Scramble!" the famous word meaning take off immediately. Every pilot snaps to life, drops everything and sprints to his Spitfire. Fitters are already pulling the propellers through. Rolls-Royce Merlin engines cough and then roar awake. One after another, the aircraft begin to move. In the cockpit, radios go on. The pilots report to the section leader and take guns off safe. Lining up to start is tricky. The Spitfire's long nose blocks the view, so taxiing must be done in a weaving S pattern. 2 sections of 6 form up. The leader holds up 2 fingers, 2-second intervals, then full throttle. The first Spitfire hurtles across the grass. Flames lick from the exhaust stubs. The noise is deafening. One by one, the fighters lift off, gear coming up, climbing hard. Fear and tension were palpable on the ground. But once a pilot is in the air, he focuses on handling the machine and the radio. "Red leader calling. Turn to heading 110. Climb Angels 15, crackles the headset. The controller on the ground fighter network, aided by the new radar, can see the raiders coming and vectors the defenders to the right place in time. The pilots still don't know what awaits. Perhaps they'll spot bombers before the escort pounces. A ghostly calm reigns in the cockpit. Only the engine's note and the twitch of needles on the panel. The Spitfire is entirely in the pilot's hands. There is no autopilot or onboard computer. He must constantly watch airspeed, altitude, RPM, coolant temperature, and compass. Climbing, he adjusts prop pitch and mixture to keep the engine in its sweet spot and prevent overheating. Fuel tanks are small. Over home ground, there's only about an hour's endurance. On offensive sweeps over Europe, drop tanks are fitted, but they hamper maneuverability. So the fuel gauge gets constant attention. As the needle nears minimum, it's time to turn home, or risk a swim in the channel on empty tanks. All of this runs through a pilot's mind, alongside tactics and gunnery. No wonder they were mentally wrung out after landing. Higher up, the cockpit turns frigid. Around 13 to 16,000 feet, the oxygen mask must go on, or hypoxia threatens. Each man draws cold oxygen through the hose and feels his heart pound in anticipation. At 10,000 feet above the earth, a drama plays out that decides life or death. Reaching the assigned area, nerves tighten. Distant specks appear at last. An enemy formation. "Prepare to attack," comes the leader's order. In moments, Britons and Germans will be within gun range. What follows is a blur of climbs and dives, brutal turns and gunfire. In short, a fight to the finish. We'll look at the battle itself through a Spitfire pilot's eyes. A furious melee erupts. The formation breaks into individual duels. A chaotic dogfight. Our pilot sees Messerschmitt Bf-109s burst from the high cloud and pounce out of the sun on the British Spitfires. "Break! Attack from the sun!" someone shouts on the radio. The classic "tally-ho" rings in the headphones. The RAF's cry on sighting the enemy and beginning the attack. Adrenaline explodes. A sharp tug on the stick, and the aircraft flips toward the attackers. Instantly, a crushing G-load pins him to the seat. Blood drains from his head, and the edges of his vision darken. The violent maneuver spoils the enemy's aim. Bf-109 rounds hiss past, stitching only a few holes in the wings. A close shave. Now it's the British turn. Our pilot spots a tail in front, pushes over into a dive to build speed, then pulls hard up to slide onto the enemy's six. His thumb flicks the gun button off safe. A Luftwaffe silhouette wobbles in the sight. Closer. "Guns!" He squeezes the trigger. The Spitfire's wings shudder to the blast. 8 Browning machine guns spit hundreds of rounds in seconds. Acrid cordite smoke and hot oil sting the cockpit for a heartbeat. The Messerschmitt is suddenly caught in the crossfire of 2 Spitfires, and in a blink comes apart. Black smoke and burning fragments tumble toward the earth. There's no time to celebrate. Other bullets hiss nearby. A mate yells that he has a bandit on his tail. Our pilot yanks aside to look. Down right, there, a Spitfire with a gray-green Bf-109 glued behind, firing burst after burst. The British machine erupts, fuel tank or ammunition hit. In an instant, the sky becomes hell. Burning wreckage falls, and no parachute is seen. Our pilot's heart clenches, but instinct screams to survive. He slams the throttle and jinks out of the line of fire. The fight goes on, perhaps only minutes, but it feels like forever. Sweat runs under the oxygen mask. He keeps craning his head, checking his six. The sky is laced with tangled contrails. A Spitfire or a Messerschmitt flashes past. Friend or foe is judged in a flicker. Decisions made in fractions of a second. Ammunition dwindles. Fuel, too. A glance at the instruments shows the section is scattered. No wingmen in sight. The radio is chaos. Snatches of frantic voices, then only static. Perhaps the leader is down, or his set has failed. Alone, a pilot becomes hunter and prey at once. After a few more maneuvers, the sky empties. As suddenly as it began, the fight is over. The enemy is shot down or gone. Our pilot spots 2 Spitfires circling in the distance, also searching. He joins them and checks fuel, just enough to get home. Time to head back. Landing after combat is treacherous, not only from adrenaline or damage, but from emotion. The pilot must still his shaking hands and focus on the approach. When his Spitfire's wheels skip across the grass and the machine rolls to a stop, he can finally breathe. With the Merlin ticking down, he feels his hands and legs tremble from adrenaline and G-forces. One by one, the survivors land. Not all who took off that morning return. Fitters await anxiously at dispersal, counting the aircraft, sprinting to the ones that roll in to inspect bullet-torn skins and help pilots out. There's no time for long talk. The squadron commander needs a quick account. How the fight went, how many enemy claimed, how many of their own lost, and in what direction the enemy broke away. Pilots gather around the intelligence officer who takes their reports. Voices overlap, loud, excited, the stress of combat still ringing. There are a few hearty backslaps for a confirmed victory, and a few quiet curses for those damned messers. A thought flickers. Who hasn't come back? Names aren't spoken yet. Perhaps some will limp in late. Perhaps they're missing. For now, the priority is turning aircraft and aircrew around for the next sortie if another wave comes. Mechanics refuel, rearm, and check engines immediately. The pilots reach for water or a mug of tea to soothe raw throats, wipe sweat from brows. Someone's hand shakes, lighting a cigarette. Nicotine helps steady the nerves. In an hour, a new order may send them aloft again. After a grueling day of several sorties, evening brings the longed-for lull. The sun sets, and a slow relaxation spreads over the base. Someone hurriedly writes a letter home. Another collapses on his bunk and falls straight asleep. Most drift to the officer's mess or the local pub, if any still stands nearby. There they take a pint of beer or a nip of whiskey, trade funny stories, and bleed off tension with humor. They call it the swine bath, washing away stress with generous doses of laughter and friendly ribbing. The man with a victory may recount it modestly, while the rest tease him. In the corner, someone plays a squeeze box softly, or a gramophone turns a swing record. The room smells of tobacco smoke and spilled beer, and loud laughter rises. For a while, they can forget tomorrow. To the outside world, these young men are heroes of a glorious battle. Here they are foremost, a band of comrades who have survived another day on the edge of life and death. The wider public may associate Spitfire pilots chiefly with the defense of Britain's skies in 1940. In reality, their work continued and took new forms. From 1941, fighters began offensive fighter sweeps over occupied Europe, escorted Allied bombers on daylight raids over Germany, and even made dangerous low-level attacks on ground targets. These missions brought extra risks, intense flak from the ground, or the danger of capture if forced down far behind enemy lines. As the war drew on, British pilots even faced the first jet fighters, the Messerschmitt Me-262s the Germans sent into combat. For the first time in history, piston-engined fighters met jets that were hundreds of kilometers per hour faster than their Spitfires. Yet tactics were adapted, attacking the Me-262s when, short on fuel, they had to descend to land and lost their speed advantage. This shows how the Spitfire pilot's role evolved constantly through the war, demanding new skills and tricks. The essence, however, stayed the same. Every takeoff meant a willingness to risk life, over home England, the sea, or foreign soil. Any sortie could be the last. The brutal statistics. In the most critical periods, an active fighter pilot's frontline life expectancy was only a few weeks. During the Battle of Britain in 1940, Fighter Command lost 544 aircrew, and that was only the first of many campaigns. The young pilots knew this. Over evening drinks, they often realized someone from yesterday's table was gone and would not return. Yet they did not speak of it openly. A comrade's death was usually met with silence, or deflected with black humor. It was their shield against paralyzing fear. Fear was every pilot's constant companion, even for the most seasoned ace. Only the way they managed it differed. Outwardly, they maintained an air of confidence. Youthful swagger and wit helped keep anxiety down. One of them, 19-year-old Geoffrey Wellham, later recalled telling himself, "Nothing will happen to me. Something like that hits the other chap." This near-superstitious belief, that it won't be me, was common in their hearts. Yet each man knew that tomorrow his turn might come. When the BBC's evening bulletin announced the day's losses, a chill ran through every pilot. Was a friend among them? Parents and families lived endless days of dread by the radio. As months went by, casualties mounted, and replacements flowed constantly into squadrons. The original core of a unit thinned dangerously. Veterans sometimes, subconsciously, kept a certain distance from newcomers. Many Sprague, green pilots, would not last, and the old hands did not want to get too close only to grieve their loss. Even so, pilots stuck together. When it came to a fight, they were each other's only support. The bond of brotherhood helped them endure the war's horrors. Shared danger forged lifelong ties. In battle, they relied on each other like brothers. Some, however, could not withstand the mental strain. Especially after long strings of continuous operations, a pilot could slide into what was then called battle weariness. Today, we would say post-traumatic stress. The RAF of the time, unfortunately, took little account of mental health. If someone refused to fly from fear or exhaustion, he risked the label LMF, lack of moral fiber, a mark of cowardice that could end a career in disgrace. Most therefore gritted their teeth and carried on with orders, even while suffering inside. Many were plagued by insomnia and nightmares. Some turned to alcohol to numb nerves. Others clung to letters from home or to faith in God. There were small comforts, a squadron mascot, perhaps a friendly dog or a cat roaming the airfield, brought a bit of joy and helped them forget the stress for a moment. Coveted short leaves away from the front were rare. A few days in the rear or visiting loved ones could work wonders for morale. The most experienced pilots were periodically rotated off ops to serve as instructors. Teaching new cadets was a calling and a heavy responsibility. Battle-hardened men tried to hammer home every lesson that could save a life. Watching beginners' clumsy attempts from the ground was not easy. Every instructor knew mistakes in combat were unforgiving. Many veterans admitted that instructing was more stressful than flying ops themselves. Often they longed to return to their squadrons, where they felt oddly safer, while school duty gnawed at them as their friends risked their lives at the front. Some, of their own will, soon went back to operations. Thus, over the front, generations of fighter pilots met side by side again. For those wounded in action who survived, another kind of fight began. Bailing out of a burning aircraft or crash landing often meant spinal injuries, broken limbs, or severe burns. Many pilots had faces scarred by flames while escaping cockpits. For such veterans, the renowned plastic surgeon Archibald McIndoe founded the Guinea Pig Club, where burned airmen supported one another through long months of treatment and experimental surgeries. With incredible effort, many returned to duty and climbed back into cockpits, testament to their resolve. If a pilot was shot down over enemy territory and lived, captivity awaited. Spending the rest of the war in a POW camp was a hard test of patience. Better than death, but bitterly frustrating for men used to constant action. A few daring souls managed to escape or evade. The Czechoslovak pilot František Feitel, for example, was shot down over occupied France and, with the help of the resistance, crossed the Pyrenees into neutral Spain, eventually returning to Britain to fly again. Such stories were exceptional. The vast majority of downed pilots remained in German POW camps until war's end. For those lost at sea, the RAF created a dedicated air-sea rescue service. Supermarine walrus flying boats and fast launches searched for pilots in dinghies or hanging from parachutes, often saving them before the cold ocean could claim them. Every pilot flying over water carried a small emergency dinghy and trusted that if he went into the drink, his mates would not leave him to fate. Consider the fate of British pilot Douglas Bader. He had lost both legs in a pre-war crash, yet with prosthetics was taken back into the RAF and became one of its most celebrated aces, credited with 22 victories. When he was himself shot down over France in 1941 and captured, the Germans, out of respect, allowed a new set of spare prosthetics to be parachuted in from Britain so he could walk in captivity. Such was the esteem he inspired. Even in the camp, Bader did not sit idle and attempted escape repeatedly. His unbreakable spirit remains a symbol of the resilience of wartime airmen who would not be crushed by any obstacle. Every day of the war brought new feats and tragedies. Of the original company of friends who began training together, only a handful met again by war's end. Some top fighter pilots became famous aces with medals and names known to the press. Most remained unknown heroes who simply did their duty. All of them, one way or another, bore an immense burden of responsibility, and each showed exceptional courage by strapping in day after day, ready to face death. The deprivations and suffering we've described were not borne only by native Britons. The RAF was truly a multinational air legion. During the Battle of Britain, foreigners made up about a fifth of Fighter Command's pilots. Alongside the British, Canadians, Australians, New Zealanders, South Africans, and émigrés from occupied Europe, Poles, Czechoslovaks, Belgians, Frenchmen, took their seats in Spitfires and Hurricanes. Even a few Americans and Irish volunteered before their countries entered the war. Each had his personal story and motivation, united by the goal of defeating Nazism. We should mention the pilots serving on distant theaters, such as besieged Malta in 1942. There, British and foreign volunteers faced not only constant raids, but a lack of everything, from fuel and ammunition to food. Former pilot Alan Scott recalled that on Malta, everyone was constantly hungry, yet they kept flying because they had to. Pilots launched multiple times a day against superior Axis numbers, and in the evenings could barely stand from exhaustion. The island was bombed incessantly. Even back at base, they had no rest and often slept in dugouts. Such extreme conditions underline how incredibly resilient these people had to be, wherever they fought. Spitfires also served in North Africa and later in Burma and the Pacific. There, beyond enemy aircraft, pilots faced extreme heat, sandstorms, tropical diseases, and insects. Machinery suffered from omnipresent sand in the desert and corrosion in the jungle humidity. A fighter pilot's operational life took many forms depending on location, but courage and self-denial were the constant thread. Poles and Czechoslovaks shone with special brightness, men who fled the Nazis and formed their own squadrons in Britain. The famed Polish 303 Squadron shot down more enemy aircraft in 1940 than any other RAF unit during the Battle of Britain. Among its ranks fought the Czech fighter Josef František, who scored 17 victories and ranked among the most successful pilots of all. Soon there were also all Czechoslovak squadrons, 310, 312, and 313, flying first Hurricanes and later Spitfires. Besides their oath, these men had a personal cause, to avenge their enslaved homeland and help free it. At first they met some distrust and language barriers. English was not native to many, and British command wondered how they would fit. It quickly became clear they were extraordinarily brave and capable. They flew with enthusiasm and often with even greater heart. Their motivation ran deep in their blood. One British commander declared that thanks to Polish pilots, Britain won the Battle of Britain. So unmatched was their heroism. Czechoslovak airmen likewise earned respect. Regardless of nationality or language, they became equal members of the RAF, received British decorations, and some rose to command. Comradeship knew no borders. In combat, they were all in the same boat. After the war, many foreign pilots returned home, at least those who could. For some, sadly, there was no happy ending. Czechoslovak heroes who had fought under RAF wings were at first celebrated, but after the communist takeover in 1948, the situation reversed. Many were persecuted, imprisoned, or forced to flee west again because the new regime did not trust them. A similar fate met Polish pilots who could not safely return to a Soviet-controlled homeland. A bitter paradox. Men who risked their lives against Hitler became victims of new oppression, yet their wartime merits were not erased. In Britain and beyond, they remained forever recorded as part of the glorious few, as Winston Churchill called the pilots of the Battle of Britain. The stories of Spitfire pilots still speak to us more than 80 years later. It is hard to imagine what they endured. Most were barely in their 20s, Today's young people at that age often study, travel, or start careers. Their counterparts then risked life day after day in the cockpits of fragile fighters. We live in relative safety and comfort, to which those airmen greatly contributed. Their courage and sacrifice laid foundations for a peace we often take for granted. After the war, pilots faced the hard task of returning to ordinary life. Many stayed in aviation as career officers or tried their luck in civil flying, but for others it was difficult to return to routine. The war had taught them to live intensely day by day. Suddenly, the adrenaline was gone. Post-traumatic stress was not a phrase then, yet many veterans quietly suffered nightmares and memories of fallen friends. In time, most reintegrated and found new callings, though nothing in their lives could ever surpass the feeling of sitting in a Spitfire as young men, defending their land. A modern military pilot has the latest technology, but spirit and resolve remain as vital as in the Spitfire's day. The stories of fighter pilots teach us values like courage, teamwork, and perseverance in adversity. Though the world has changed since the 1940s, human heroism and the readiness to risk oneself for others are timeless. Remembering Spitfire pilots, we see how fragile the road to victory was and how significant a role individuals played. These airmen are still rightly honored. Every September, Britain marks Battle of Britain Day, when the engines of surviving Spitfires rumble overhead at air shows. In the Czech Republic and Poland, after 1989, monuments and plaques to RAF heroes were restored, their names studied by new generations. Until recently, the last witnesses were still among us. General Emil Bocek, the last Czech Spitfire pilot, lived to 100 and with pride remembered his comrades to the end. Now the history of that glorious few remains to us in books, chronicles, and stories, and it is up to us not to forget their legacy. When we look today at the gleaming lacquer of museum Spitfires, or at combat footage in documentaries and films, we should remember what a hard crust this profession truly was. Behind the elegant silhouette lay sleepless nights, frozen fingers on the stick, the loss of friends, and a constant wrestling with fear. A Spitfire pilot's life was incredibly hard, but thanks to these extraordinarily determined ordinary lads, the rest of us can live our lives in peace. It is a legacy we must never forget. Thank you for watching this video to the end. If you enjoyed it and learned something new, I'd be grateful if you left a like and shared it with your friends.